The flag in Marcus Okafor's hand weighed almost nothing. That was the thing about the south marker position. You stood at the far end of a high desert valley that ran nearly 2 miles to the ridge wall. You held a signal flag you barely knew how to read, and the wind came off the plateau in long, invisible rolls that made the range grass lean in slow waves, like something breathing. He was 19 years old, 11 weeks out of basic, and this was his first multinational live fire exercise. He had been told to stand still, watch the line, and flag any missed indicators. He had not been told what to do with his hands when they shook. The morning had started at 05:30 with trucks, the Allied observer delegation, the NATO coordination staff, 3 generals in unmarked vehicles, and by 0700, Ridgecrest Combined Arms Center's high corridor was lined with 14 of the best long-range shooters from 6 nations. The joint certification required 1 confirmed engagement at 2,900 meters, any platform, any position. The range corridor ran straight and flat to a basalt ridge wall. The target plate was bolted to it. Marcus had been told the plate was the size of a man's chest, but from where he stood, it was a penny at the end of a parking lot. The woman in the orange safety vest had been on the berm since before he arrived. She walked the line quietly, checking positions, marking wind indicators with small numbered cards, pulling a tape on the north deflection stake. She wore no rank, no unit patch. She had a clipboard and a range radio clipped to her vest, and she moved the way people move when they know a place so well they've stopped looking at it. She didn't look at the shooters either. She looked at the ground, the stakes, the grass. Sergeant Major Cord Hale ran the line. He was a big, square-shouldered man with 22 years in his posture, and he moved through the formation without raising his voice, which, Marcus had already learned, meant nobody wanted to make him raise it. When the Allied observer, a trim officer whose shoulder boards Marcus couldn't read at this distance, made a comment in English that carried clearly down the flat ground, Hale didn't flinch. Marcus heard it the way you hear something you're not meant to. She's a safety tech, not a shooter. Does she need to be on the berm while my people are in position? Hale answered with something quiet. The observer nodded, once, as if he had expected the answer and found it satisfactory. The woman in the orange vest heard it too. She didn't look up from the deflection stake. She pulled the tape, logged the number, moved to the next marker. 20 minutes before the certification window opened, Hale came to the line and addressed the formation. The exercise was straightforward. 1 confirmed engagement, 2,900 meters, center mass plate, within the certification window. Each shooter would have 1 attempt. The window would close in 90 minutes. 14 shooters. The math was easy. Then, at 0812, the lead qualifier, a Marine gunnery sergeant named Torres, first position, the first name on the roster, sat down in the gravel beside his rifle and put his head between his knees. Heat casualty, not severe, but real. The corpsman was there in 2 minutes. Torres was off the line in 3. 14 shooters became 13. The window hadn't opened yet. It still wasn't a problem, except that Hale's tablet was showing a wind shift. Not a dramatic one, not a gust, not a storm, just a sustained rotation in the valley's upper corridor, the kind that came off the plateau when the morning thermal peaked. The range weather team had logged it. The shot at 2,900 meters across an open valley in a thermal wind shift was, Marcus heard one of the Allied shooters say quietly to another, a different shot than the one we prepared for. The window opened at 0830. The first shooter went at 0831. The spotter called it high and left. Miss. The second, at 0839. Right edge. Miss. By 0857, 5 shooters had fired. 3 misses. 1 confirmed hit from an Austrian marksman. 1 target struck off center and ruled inconclusive by the NATO observer. The certification required 1 clean, confirmed center mass engagement. 1. And the wind in the upper corridor was not settling. Marcus had stopped shaking. He didn't know when it happened. He watched the woman in the orange vest move to the south anchor point, 10 meters from where he stood, and crouch down beside the wind gauge mounted in the gravel. She read the dial, looked up the valley, then looked at the grass around the mid-range markers. She did this for about 30 seconds. Then she stood, wrote something on her clipboard, and went still. At 0903, Hale called a hold. He walked the remaining shooters, talking to each one. Asking questions Marcus couldn't hear. The Allied observer had his arms crossed. The three generals stood behind the observation platform without speaking. It was the observer who said it first, loud enough that it reached the south anchor point. "We have 27 minutes. Is there no one on this line who can read that wind?" Hale stood at the center of the berm. He looked right, down the line of remaining shooters. He looked left. He did not look behind him, where the woman with the clipboard had been standing for the last several minutes, looking up the valley. She stepped forward anyway. "Sergeant Major." Her voice was level, not loud. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud, because it has been trained, for a long time, not to waver under pressure. Hale turned. For a moment, Marcus thought he was going to send her back to the platform. The Allied observer's head had turned. Two of the waiting shooters were watching. "Analyst win," Hale said. "This is a live certification window." "I know what it is," she said. "I've been reading the corridor since 0700. The upper thermal is rotating at 11 degrees off the valley axis. It peaks at 40-second intervals and drops 2/3 in the trough. The shot is clean for approximately 8 seconds in every trough cycle." She paused. "I'd like 1 round, Sergeant Major." The Allied observer made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Hale looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across his face that Marcus couldn't name. Not doubt exactly, and not deference. Something older than both. He looked at the remaining shooters. He looked at his tablet. He looked at the clock. 1 round, he said. She put down the clipboard. She picked up Torres's rifle from the rack, the Marine's .338, still zeroed to the morning's conditions, and checked the turrets once with 2 fingers. A quick and practiced touch, the way a surgeon checks instruments that are already laid out correctly, and checks them anyway, because the habit is older than the doubt. Then she settled into position on the berm with the unhurried precision of someone making a bed, and went still. Marcus had watched 13 shooters assume firing position that morning. He had watched them check their adjustments, work their breathing, settle into the stock. They all looked like what they were, trained men doing a trained thing, with effort visible in the set of their shoulders and the tension in their hands. She looked like she'd been there for years. Her spotter, she had no spotter, she was alone, didn't matter. She had her own reading. Marcus watched her look down the valley once, and not again. She found the rhythm of the wind in the grass without seeming to search for it. The flag in his hand picked up a faint edge of the thermal, and he felt the exact moment the air went momentarily flat. The rifle fired. The sound rolled down the valley and came back off the ridge wall a full second later, a deep, flat knock that Marcus felt in his chest. He didn't breathe. The radio on the target team's vehicle crackled. A voice came back, clipped and factual. "Confirmed. Center mass. Distance 2900. 1 round. Silence. Not the silence between events, but the silence after the last thing has happened and the room, or the valley, is still catching up to what it means." Marcus realized the flag was still in his hand. He had not waved it. He did not know when he had forgotten to. She did not move from the position immediately. She cleared the chamber in the same unhurried way she had settled into it, set the rifle back, and stood. She picked up her clipboard. She looked down the valley once more, at the wind gauges, as if checking her own read against the outcome. Hale was already on his tablet. Marcus watched him scroll. He watched the sergeant major's thumb slow, then stop. He watched Cord Hale, 22 years in his posture, a man who didn't raise his voice so that nobody would make him, go very still. Hale read whatever was on the screen for 5 full seconds. Then he looked up at the woman with the clipboard. "Win," he said. His voice had changed in a way Marcus couldn't locate. Quieter, but not softer. "Your file says test line." She looked at him. She didn't say anything. 3,060 meters, he said. "Confirmed. Joint exercise, Calder Basin, 7 years ago." He paused. "Youngest woman to hold the Ranger Sniper Instructor qualification. You've held this record since you were 24 years old." He turned the tablet so the NATO liaison could see the screen. The liaison looked at it. He looked at Analyst Win. He looked at the screen again. Hale put the tablet down. He straightened to his full height and faced her. "Firing line," he said. His voice carried the full length of the berm without effort. "Attention." 14 Allied shooters came to their feet. Not a formation order. There was no formation order. No structure that required it. No protocol that covered civilian range safety analysts who had just solved an impossible shot in a thermal wind corridor. They came to their feet on their own, each of them, the way men do when they have watched something they recognize, and the only answer the body knows is to stand. The three generals on the observation platform stepped forward. One of them, Marcus would later learn, was the senior army observer, a man with 2 stars, who had stood at the back of the platform for the entire exercise without speaking. He spoke now, 2 words, in the direction of the NATO liaison. The liaison nodded, unclipped something from his breast pocket. A range qualification tab, gold thread on green, the kind awarded at the completion of a joint certification, and walked to where she was standing. He pinned it to her vest. She let him. She stood composed, looking down the valley, the way she had been looking all morning, as if the honor were secondary to the read she was still taking, the thermal still peaking and dropping at its 40-second intervals, the valley still doing what valleys do. "Thank you," she said, not to the room, to the tab maybe, or to the distance. The Allied observer, the trim man with the shoulder boards and the comment that had carried down the flat ground an hour ago, said nothing. He was looking at the basalt ridge. He did not look at her. He did not look at Hale. After a long moment, he picked up his own clipboard and wrote something on it, and Marcus understood without being told that whatever he wrote, it would not be the thing he had said at 0712. The sergeant major called the formation down. Marcus was the last one standing. He stood at the south marker with the signal flag in his hand, the one he had forgotten to wave, and he looked down the valley, at the basalt ridge, and the penny-sized plate that was now certified confirmed. The thermal had shifted again. The grass was leaning in long, slow waves. He had come to Ridgecrest 11 weeks out of basic training, and he had not known what he was looking at when he saw her walking the berm with the clipboard and the orange vest. He had heard the observer's comment and said nothing, which was what you said at 19 when a man with shoulder boards spoke in your direction. He had watched 14 of the best long-range shooters in 6 nations work the problem and come up short, and he had watched her read the answer in the grass before any of them had found it. He would try, for the rest of his career, to explain what he had seen, the stillness, the single round, the valley going quiet, and he would find, every time, that the words were not quite right. Not because it was complicated, because it was so simple. Because a woman who knew the wind better than any man on that line had been standing at the south anchor point since before anyone arrived, doing her job, and when the window was closing and the shot was still open, she had stepped to the berm and closed it. 14 elite shooters had risen without an order. 3 generals had stepped forward from the platform. Cord Hale, 22 years in his posture, had called the line to attention for a civilian in an orange vest. And she had looked down the valley, the way she had been looking all morning, already reading the next wind.